wife cheated on me early in our relationship, but I didn't find out until 14 years later. We already have children, and I have to make an important decision.
I guess I should start by saying that I've always prided myself on being a pretty level-headed guy. My name's Jack, and at 35 years old, I figured I had a solid handle on life. I'm married to my wife, Emily, who's 37, and we've been together for 14 years, married for 11 of those. We have a beautiful 7-year-old daughter, Lily, who's the light of our lives. Our marriage has been, for the most part, a dream. I mean, no major problems, no big fights, just the usual ups and downs that come with sharing your life with someone else. But last year, everything changed. It's funny how life can feel like it's on this smooth, predictable track, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, it veers off course, and you find yourself in uncharted territory. It all started with a phone call from one of Emily's old friends, Lisa. Lisa and Emily had been tight back in college, part of a close-knit group that did everything together. After graduation, they drifted apart, as people do, but they still kept in touch now and then. Lisa had always been the wild one in their group, but recently she'd had some kind of religious awakening and was on this mission to set things right in her past. So she called me up one day, out of the blue, and asked if we could meet. She said there was something important she needed to tell me, something about Emily. I was curious, of course, but I didn't think much of it. I figured it was something minor, maybe some long-forgotten prank or a bit of gossip. We met at a coffee shop, and Lisa looked nervous, which was odd. She always had this air of confidence, a kind of fearless energy. But that day, she seemed almost timid. She started off with some small talk, asking about Lily and how things were going with us. Then she took a deep breath, launched into this story about a night 14 years ago, just a few months into Emily's and my relationship. Apparently, there had been a party, a lot of drinking, and things had gotten out of hand. Lisa told me that Emily had cheated on me that night with some guy she barely knew. My first reaction was disbelief. It felt like she was talking about someone else, not my Emily. We'd been so happy, so solid, I couldn't wrap my head around it. But as Lisa kept talking, detailing the events of that night, I felt this cold knot forming in my stomach. She wasn't lying. I could see it in her eyes, hear it in her voice. She was genuinely remorseful, not just for what had happened, but for keeping it from me all these years. She said she couldn't live with the guilt anymore and needed to come clean, even if it meant blowing up my life in the process. I left the coffee shop in a daze, my mind racing. I had to confront Emily, but I had no idea how to even begin. When I got home, she was there, playing with Lily in the living room. Seeing them together, so happy and carefree, it was like a punch to the gut. I waited until Lily was in bed before I brought it up. I told Emily about my meeting with Lisa, watched as the color drained from her face, and then asked her if it was true. Emily looked like she'd been slapped. She stumbled over her words at first, then started crying, apologizing, saying she'd been young and stupid and drunk. She said it had meant nothing, that she'd regretted it immediately, and had sworn to never do anything like that again. She begged me to understand, to see that it was a mistake from a lifetime, and that it had nothing to do with the life we'd built together since then. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to yell and scream and throw things, but instead, I just felt numb. I asked her why she hadn't told me before, and she said she'd been terrified of losing me, that she knew how much it would hurt me and didn't want to risk our future over something she saw as a meaningless fling. She kept saying how much she loved me, how much she loved our family, and that she'd never do anything to jeopardize that. We sat there in silence for a long time, her crying, me just staring at the wall. Part of me wanted to get up and walk out, to leave and never look back. But another part of me, the rational part, knew that she was right. It had been a long time ago. We were different people then. We had a daughter now, a life together that was good and strong. I couldn't just throw all of that away because of one mistake. I told Emily that I needed time to process everything. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and said she understood. That night, I slept on the couch, my mind spinning with thoughts of betrayal, anger, and confusion. I kept thinking about our wedding day, the birth of our daughter, all the happy memories we'd made together. How could something like this have been hiding in the shadows all this time? In the days that followed, I tried to go about my routine, but it was like moving through molasses. Everything felt heavy, slow. I'd look at Emily and feel this pang of sadness and hurt. Then I'd see Lily's smile and remember why I was trying to make this work. I started seeing a therapist, trying to untangle the mess of emotions inside me. Emily and I went to couples counseling too, trying to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't easy. There were days when I'd think about leaving, about starting fresh somewhere else. But then I'd look at my daughter, at the life we'd built, and I knew I couldn't just walk away. I loved Emily. Despite everything, I still loved her, and I knew she loved me too. You know, they say time heals all wounds, but I quickly found out that's not always the case. After that night when Emily confirmed what Lisa had told me, things didn't magically get better. Sure, we went through the motions, therapy, counseling, trying to talk it out, but deep down, I was broken. The thing about betrayal is that it sticks with you. Emily's affair might have happened 14 years ago, but for me, it was fresh, like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I found myself less confident, second-guessing everything, even simple decisions. I couldn't shake the image of Emily with someone else, the betrayal gnawing at my insides like a relentless parasite. The worst part was the intimacy, or rather the lack of. Every time I looked at Emily, all I could see was the betrayal. My body reacted to it in the worst possible way. I couldn't get an erection. The very thought of being intimate with her filled me with a deep-seated disgust. It was like my body was rejecting her, even though my mind kept telling me to move past it. I tried to hide it at first, making excuses, avoiding situations that could lead to sex. But Emily noticed. How could she not? She asked me about it, tried to be supportive, but every conversation just made things worse. I felt like less of a man, less of a husband. The guilt and shame were suffocating. One night, I found myself spiraling into a pit of paranoia and doubt. I needed to know for sure, so I took drastic measures. I secretly took a DNA test for Lily and an STD test for myself. I was desperate for some kind of reassurance, something that could give me a sliver of peace of mind. When the results came back, showing that Lily was indeed my daughter and I was clean, I felt a brief moment of relief, but it was fleeting. I threw myself into intense individual therapy, hoping to fix whatever was broken inside me. My therapist helped me unpack a lot of the trauma, but there was no quick fix. I was fundamentally changed by what I'd learned. I wasn't the same Jack anymore. The carefree, trusting guy I used to be was gone, replaced by someone more guarded, more cynical. As the months dragged on, I realized that despite all our efforts, I couldn't get past what had happened. The trust was shattered, and no amount of counseling or therapy could glue it back together. I started thinking about divorce, a thought that once would have been unthinkable to me. But now it seemed like the only way to preserve what little sanity I had left. I made a list of reasons, trying to rationalize my decision. 1. Trust. The foundation of our marriage was cracked. Trust isn't something you can just rebuild overnight. Every time I looked at Emily, I saw a stranger, someone who had kept a monumental secret from me for over a decade. 2. Intimacy. Our sex life was dead. I couldn't get past the mental block that her betrayal had created. The physical connection we once had was gone, and I didn't see it coming back. 3. Self-respect. Staying in the marriage felt like I was betraying myself. I deserved to be with someone who didn't carry the baggage of betrayal, someone who hadn't cheated and lied. 4. Mental health. My mental health had taken a huge hit. I was constantly anxious, depressed, and on edge. Therapy was helping, but I knew that as long as I stayed in the marriage, I'd never fully heal. 5. Future happiness. I wanted to be happy again. To feel joy and contentment without the shadow of betrayal hanging over me. I realized that staying with Emily meant living in a constant state of emotional turmoil. I sat down with Emily one evening, my heart heavy with the weight of what I was about to say. She looked at me, eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear, probably sensing what was coming. I took a deep breath and told her I wanted a divorce. She started crying, begging me to reconsider, to keep trying. But I was resolute. I told her that I couldn't keep living a lie, that we both deserved a chance to find happiness, even if it wasn't together. The divorce process was painful, as these things always are. We had to figure out custody arrangements for Lily, divide our assets, and navigate the emotional minefield of ending a long-term relationship. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And as much as it hurt, I knew it was the right decision. In the days and weeks after deciding to divorce Emily, I found myself reflecting more and more on what had transpired over the past year. The revelation of her cheating, while devastating, wasn't just about the act itself. It was about the years of deceit that followed. For 14 years, Emily had kept this secret, allowing me to believe in a version of our relationship that wasn't entirely true. She only came clean because she was forced to, not because she chose to. I kept turning over in my mind the fact that she didn't confess of her own volition. When she did apologize, it felt hollow. She kept insisting that it wasn't important anymore, that it was just a mistake from a long time ago. But to me, it was important. Cheating was, and still is, one of my biggest deal breakers. If I'd known back then, I would have ended things. Young me was robbed of having a choice. That realization gnawed at me. It's not that I wasn't grateful for the life we'd built, or the beautiful daughter we shared. Lily is the light of my life, my reason for getting up in the morning. She's my constant source of joy, and I wouldn't trade her for anything. But knowing that my decision-making was compromised from the start, that I'd been living a lie, was a bitter pill to swallow. I was happy with Lily's existence, but I couldn't shake the feeling of having been manipulated. Individual counseling, IC, and marriage counseling, MC, were supposed to help us navigate through this, but they fell short. My therapist tried to understand my pain, but they couldn't fully grasp the depth of my feelings. Emily and I would leave sessions feeling more disconnected than ever. Our unresolved issues started bleeding into our daily lives, affecting our family dynamic in ways that I feared would harm Lily in the long run. I didn't want her growing up in a home filled with tension and unspoken resentment. I remember one night in particular, lying next to Emily in bed. We had sex, but it felt mechanical, lifeless. I found myself staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds until it was over. It was like one of those scenes from a movie where the woman is disengaged, just waiting for the moment to pass. Except I was the one feeling detached. The physical connection we once shared was gone, and with it, any semblance of non-sexual intimacy as well. I recoiled from her touch, resented her gestures of affection. Living in such a strained environment was unsustainable. I started to believe that Lily would be better off with us as co-parents, rather than living in a house filled with constant arguments and emotional distance. She deserved a stable, loving environment, even if it meant her parents were no longer together. The day I filed for divorce was one of the hardest days of my life. Emily was distraught, begging me to reconsider, to keep trying, but I was resolute. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay, couldn't keep living in a state of perpetual unhappiness. We sat down with Lily and explained as gently as we could what was happening. She was young, but smart. She understood more than we gave her credit. I reassured her that we both loved her very much and that nothing would change that. As the divorce proceedings moved forward, I found myself reflecting on what I'd learned from this experience. It was a painful lesson in trust, in the importance of honesty, and in the value of self-respect. I realized that my decision to leave wasn't just about Emily's betrayal. It was about reclaiming my own sense of agency, my right to make informed choices about my life. Emily and I worked hard to establish a healthy co-parenting relationship. We both wanted what was best for Lily, and despite our differences, we managed to find common ground. We set aside our personal grievances to focus on raising our daughter in a supportive, loving environment. I won't say it was easy. There were days when I struggled with anger and resentment, when the past loomed large and threatened to overshadow the present. But I learned to compartmentalize, to focus on what mattered most. I threw myself into my work, found solace in hobbies I'd neglected, and slowly, painfully began to rebuild my life.